In the 18th century, the most common way of defining an animal and a plant was codified by the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus. Linnaeus said that stones grow, plants grow and live, and animals grow, live, and feel. So the big difference between plants and animals in the 18th century, as they were scientifically defined, was that animals could feel, but plants could not. Now, in the poem The Botanic Garden by Erasmus Darwin, Darwin's plants are very much alive. The plants have human emotions and they can do all kinds of things that plants can't really do, like smiling and kissing and having affairs. Now, of course, these are just poetic devices designed to encourage interest in botany and make the poem more lively. But Darwin really did believe that plants could do certain activities that most people didn't think plants could do. For example, he speaks at length about plants sleeping. He thought that in the evening plants went to sleep, and that they could sort of sense daylight, that they knew when it was nighttime, and that they did have some kind of sense. So for Darwin, the very rigid definitions of plants versus animals and this idea of sensation wasn't quite as rigidly observed as in some other naturalists.
It's exceptional, and it's still pretty exceptional. I don't think many other plants have been found with responses quite like it, in that it folds up its leaves when it's touched, and folds them up in a fairly remarkable way, like a sort of a retracting fan. The leaves close up longitudinally along the main rib. And this also fascinated um, 18th century poets and scientists. Um, but I think here again you get this reference to sensitivity as an a priori force, something which exists in living tissue. And to that extent, that generation of scientists who explained the mimosa's reaction simply by sensitivity were putting it on a par with animals, with sensitive skins. It was just something that living tissue possessed. But of course, a lot more of them went much further than that, weren't persuaded by that simple argument, and they wanted, as they did with the Venus flytrap, to know about the mechanics of the situation, what was actually going on inside the leaf that could make these contractions happen so quickly. And various hydraulic theories were put forward, that it was to do with liquid being, as it were, squeezed through the tube of the twig. One hears the first mentions of electricity, of course, being posited then, because this was a novel force. Many scientists and poets are very excited about it. They thought that it might explain everything, that it would be the universal universal source of energy in all living things, which of course we now know it is in an odd backhanded way. And of course you get all manner of forms of belief in vitalism, the attempt to isolate what it was that made a living thing like a plant different from a stone. Again, you get a kind of a priori explanation that there is a vital force, but electricity was certainly beginning to look like the main one. What's interesting, intellectually in all this is the much demonized use of an analogy. Richard Worth's book is a great attack upon this, but the principal mode of reasoning amongst that kind of generation of scientists, given a problem which visually looked familiar, movement of limbs, is to find an answer from a part of the living kingdom which was vaguely understood, so that one might have analogues of muscles in the Venus flytrap. One might have analogues of capillaries of the blood in the Mimosa. One might have analogues of the stomach in both the Venus flytrap and in the sundew, another family of carnivorous plants. Now, there's been a almost cardinal rule amongst biologists to rubbish this tradition of using analogy. They're saying, in some ways quite rightly, that it leads down to some terrible blind alleys, because different kinds of organism are different and they work by different sorts of rules. Though, of course, they all work by the laws of physics. And I think, in my reading of, let's say, the poet's use of analogy, is that it is very often profoundly helpful. It may be wrong by 20 degrees, but it's going in the right direction. It's suggesting a certain kind of way of working, which is the way that any organism put together on the planet has to work. It has to obey gravity. Liquids have to go through tubes. And to say they're identical, of course, is wrong. But to rule out making a forward step by saying, look, this is the kind of zone we're in. We're talking about the contraction of tissues. We've seen in the lab how the electric eel works. Well, not works, but we've seen that electricity can be produced by the changes in the tissue of an animal. Might this not also be true in plants? They got the mechanism of the way the electricity worked wrong in the plant, but they weren't wrong to think that it was actually, as was finally discovered with the Venus flytrap, electric signals that actually triggered the final snap. So I think my position generally on the kind of both botany in poetry, but also what I might call the poetic outlook on botany, was that it was profoundly contributory. It set the intellectual context for a way of thinking forward about how these creatures actually worked.
In the 18th century, there were two big philosophical schools of thought that underpinned studies of natural objects. These were the mechanical school of thought and the vitalist school of thought. Those who favored mechanical explanations said that all events in nature could be explained according to the laws of physics, especially Newtonian physics, and the laws of chemistry, while on the other side, those who adhered to the vitalist theory argued that there was something special and unique about life, something that could not be explained just by simple mechanics. A really nice example of mechanical theories versus vitalist theories in practice came from studies of sensitive plants. These were plants like the mimosa. The mimosa is a plant that is sensitive to touch. Whenever you touch it, its leaves instantly fold downwards, sort of collapsing onto its stem. This was a plant from the New World, and it had been known about in Europe from about the 17th century. The first people who studied it thought that maybe the mimosa had nerves, that it had these nerves that were a bit like animal nerves, which were not something that were generally acknowledged to exist in the plant kingdom. And there was a lot of debate about whether the mimosa could really feel, or whether it was just moving according to fluid mechanics within it. If you touch it, does that affect the sap in some way and cause a mechanical response? So on the one side, a lot of scientists, naturalists were saying that the mimosa couldn't really feel, it just appeared to be able to feel because of mechanical laws acting on it. While on the other side, a lot of naturalists adhered to the vitalist theory, and they said that the mimosa could really feel and could really react to its environment. And if that was true, of course, that would make it an awful lot more like an animal than most other plants.